In the recent One Piece chapter, we have Eustace Captain Kidd, a very controversial character, I feel like in the fandom, have a sort of incident where people are kind of questioning what is the purpose of Kidd throughout the entire story. I've been one of the people in the past, if you've known me at all on this channel, watched my videos, live streams, or have just interacted with me in general, I have not been one of favor when it comes to Kidd and his fandom. Mainly because I have never been one of those people that said, yeah, Kidd is that guy, which is kind of the premise of this video, where we're going to be talking about Kidd and this idea that he is someone that should be up there with the likes of Luffy, and how he's been always set up to be that way, and kind of why now people are freaking out with the recent events in chapter 1079. However, in this case, we're going to come at this in a purely, non-objective, kind of neutral, no biases really, just trying to really dive in and really dissect what Kidd's character role has been throughout the story. So, first and foremost, let's get into his background when he first showed up. Okay, so first we have his chapter origins. 498 is when Kidd first gets introduced with the rest of the Supernova by Shaki, and how she talks about how Luffy is now the 11th member to arrive on this island who has a bounty over 100 million, and that this new youngsters are being proclaimed as the Supernova or the worst generation. And, we see, Luffy's travels at this given point in time. He's caused a major incident in Alabasta with Crocodile to the point of it had to get covered up. And then you get to the point of you have now before Sabaody with Water 7, where he had to, get Robin back and invade Enies Lobby, a place that should be impenetrable to all pirates. So now you're thinking going into this, there are now 11 characters that should be relatively of notoriety like Luffy. And then we get Eustace Captain Kidd in chapter 498, where obviously he has a bounty higher than Luffy. Shaki now then of course explains his bounty is only accumulated that high because he is someone who is a pirate that goes out and does pirate things. And again, that's another point of interest why characters or people in general in the fandom would eventually go flocking towards Kidd and really getting behind him as this kind of character that's very different from Luffy and yet has supposedly equal accomplishments to Luffy by this point. In Sabaody, we do kind of have this parallel between Luffy, Law, and Kidd as these kind of three young bucks that stand out from every other Supernova. You have that classic stance in chapter 504, where you have Law, Kidd, and Luffy. Kidd being in the middle, again, kind of this, little sign for people that were like, he's in the middle of all of them, standing in front of a bunch of Marines, and then showcasing their powers in that chapter, kind of relatively equal to each other, just toying with. So again, you have this kind of notion of these three now are, out of all the Supernova, the ones that we should be looking out for because they're next to Luffy. And more so than anything else, why people, I think, were going into this idea that Kidd is this really wild card of a character that needs to be attended to is because he also, like Luffy, has a right-hand man that is one of these 11 supernovas that are of 100 million or more. So, again, I don't blame anyone for saying, well, there were these very unique characteristics around Kidd and his crew compared to Luffy's crew that made people wonder, what is this character going to be in the future of the story and their interactions with the Straw Hat crew. Now, when it comes to the actual overall fighting that goes on in Sabaody, all the Supernova have their trials and tribulation. We have, Luffy and the company face pacifistas, and then eventually face Kizaru. You have other Supernova, like Aru's, Hawking's, and etc. face pacifistas, and Kizaru as well. You have Law and Kidd, mainly just, face a pacifista, but we don't really see the full extent of what happens to them. In the anime, they kind of extend that. Sabaody ends off where you kind of have this build-up of these youngsters all are kind of these infamous pirates, and they're going to try and do their best to get into the New World. We don't really see more of Kid until 2 chapters in the pre-time skip. That is, of course, 581, where you have Kid and the rest of the Supernova arrive at Marineford, where the narrator states, as a collective, they are going to be characters that will play a pivotal role in the New Age because Whitebeard has died, signifying change is upon this world. All of them. Not just Kid and Luffy, but all these characters are going to be important. Then another point to Kid is that in chapter 594, where Kid is in the New World, it is presumed that he's one of the first to tackle its waters and venture in there. And he gives the famous speech of, this is the New World, therefore you either sink or swim. And that might come back to bite Kid later on, as we clearly see what actually happens to his reputation in the New World. But again, pre-time skip, you have this really build-up of Kid being, oh, I'm going to be this person that's going to stand out and, be a wild pirate that does what he wants and takes what he wants. And people like that. People genuinely had this, likability to this character that isn't going to be like Luffy, and yet is on, Luffy's title as a supernova. It's now we get into the post-time skip where people really start to have these lofty expectations for Kid, because in comparison, we see what guys like Law and Luffy are up to. So let's get into that. Luffy. Let's start off with the fact that Luffy and Kid go different ways. As in, we have Luffy training with Rayleigh for 2 years to become stronger because he was not ready to handle the New World. Okay. Then we have Kid's perspective of he went into the New World, presumably the first to go to the New World, and that should be a big deal. We have this in the fandom at that time where you have the two sides are arguing for Luffy and Kid should be relative to each other now that we're in the post-time skip, because Luffy, though he has training, Kid has experience, and that experience in the New World should matter, as in it builds up his infamy that he's here, but also his power should be relative to Luffy coming out of it, because again, you have the trials of facing pirates that are way stronger in the New World, as we've been shown time and time again, and have been told at this point. So again, you're setting up more and more expectations for the fandom to believe that, okay, well, Luffy does this, Kid should respond in kindness with his own method. Fair enough. During Fishman Island, obviously, Luffy beats all of them, and is potentially getting a territory in the future with Fishman Island. That's a big step for him, a huge moment, but Kid does have an acclamation where apparently during that arc, is mentioned 2 days before, Kid has done damage to Big Mom's ships and her fleet. Therefore, okay, Kid may not have a territory as far as we know at this point, but he's making, headway to be a notorious pirate, even towards the Yonko, because, okay, he sank some ships. Then you get to Punk Hazard, where we see Kid for the first time come out of hiding. He has a higher bounty now. Okay, and it's a much higher bounty yet again than Luffy. So you have this previous notion in the pre-time skip, because he has a higher bounty, maybe we should be favoring him more than Luffy. So you have now this track record of people believing, because he keeps having a higher bounty than Luffy, oh, maybe he's actually truly stronger and is doing more for his pirate career than Luffy is at that given time. We see bounties in One Piece kind of have multiple meanings, and there's a lot of X factors to why someone gets a bounty raise and the whole situation around it. So I can understand it, but yet again, I don't think it's fully justified at this point to really say, oh, Kid is leading the pack when it comes to the supernovas. Now, I will say both of them have an equal opportunity within Punk Hazard, because both of them, Luffy and Law, and Kid, Apu, and Hawkins, do an alliance. Both Luffy and Kid are not leading these alliances by any way, but both of them are forming an alliance to take out Yonko. So if you wanted to say at any given point in time, all these supernovas were trying to aim for something similar. It wasn't just Luffy and Kid, but all these supernovas were having a similar goal to, strike at the Yonko and make it big for themselves. All the supernova are equally trying to get somewhere in the New World, because again, you either join the Emperors, which has been mentioned multiple times, or you sink. It's Dressrosa where we really start to see Luffy and Law, but mainly Luffy, is starting to make certain steps that Kid really isn't. And yeah, people have argued, well, we didn't see Kid's journey, so therefore we shouldn't be as critical. Fair enough, but then that kind of falls short when we get to what he actually has shown on screen later, mainly in Wano Country. What Luffy and Law do is they take a major step to getting closer to the Yonko they want to defeat, which is Kaido. They take out Doflamingo. Law does obviously help. He does. He shows major feats for himself during Punk Hazard, then into Dressrosa to help take out Doflamingo. It's just Luffy does his part and then some to take out Doflamingo, where he shows off Gear 4 and it's an amazing power-up. So it's like, okay, Gear 4 is this great thing. So therefore, the people in the Kid fandom at that time were like, well, just wait and see. Kid's going to have a moment to spark soon, and they believe that. And even though he acknowledges that Luffy and Law have taken a leap further than his group, or their group, they are still planning to take a Yonko out. Mainly Shanks. And we'll get into, more details on like his relationship with Shanks later on in the video. I think people don't realize just how much that Luffy's already starting to really push in Dressrosa. Not only in power, fair enough, it's vague how far, if at all, that he is ahead of Kid, but he has power that's pretty impressive with Gear 4. But then he gets, a bounty raise, now officially over Kid, which the Kid fandom, should be acknowledging, oh, he has a higher bounty now than himself. Like I said, for Kid's bounty being higher than Luffy's, there's some reasoning and situations behind it that we're not really sure. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, he's stronger than Luffy. It cuts both ways for Luffy's side too. But outside of the power and the bounty, Luffy gets something major. Major for himself. Not for the alliance with him and Law, for his pirate career, and that is he gets a grand fleet. A pretty impressive grand fleet. And this is when I feel like we really should start thinking like, okay, Kid has a hideout, fair enough. You can say that's a territory. But his crew, which we don't really know of, and we'll get to his crew in Wano, don't really have names for themselves outside of Killer. And he doesn't really, as far as we know, have a fleet. He has an alliance. But compare that to Luffy, who has an alliance with Law. And on top of that, he has a fleet. And on top of that, he has Fishman Island potentially to be a territory for himself. And on top of that, you can argue at this point, Dressrosa, how they are building statues of Luffy, inevitably will be a territory for Luffy. You really start to put the puzzle pieces together. Luffy's making headway that's better than Kid. But if it's, unclear at this point, fair enough for people. I think now where we get into the next section is going to be a clear statement. But before that, I do want to kind of throw this idea out there that people really at this time were really strongly gravitating toward, because they see themselves as the new generation of Roger, Whitebeard, and Shiki. The three kind of like champions of piracy back in the day. This is before rocks and all that stuff. So they really gravitate towards that idea. Okay, it's a cool idea. Nothing I think is in place yet for that, but it's a cool idea. Later on, though, we kind of should poke holes in that because there are contradictions to that statement. But to be fair, at that time, that is an idea that's been growing, so let's acknowledge that. Could that be the case? Maybe. Now, let's get into post Dressrosa.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
I've had enough of your
Get
garbage.
your ass on, boy. Get your goddamn ugly ass on.
This is where a major upheaval kind of comes for Kid, and a huge bonus for Luffy. It was the chapter title was called Suicide. It was chapter 794 or 795. Around that time, the infamous Kaido reveal happened. Kid and his party were hoping to go after Shanks. That was their goal. Now an emperor has fallen straight forward at their doorstep. And you would think, okay, this could be a make or break moment. First, for Kid. We see in the future, Kid has a lot of make or break moments that the fandom really wants to give him. People were saying at that time, Kid should have a notable moment with Kaido here that's going to increase his bounty and he'll gain some notoriety. Well, he does have a notable moment with Kaido, that's for sure. And that is, he stood his ground, but he got captured. He got captured. Whew. So, Kid fandom, for what they're worth, they stood by their dude and said, we don't know the situation. Maybe Apu and Hawkins betrayed him. Maybe. And then there's the idea of, well, it's an emperor and Kid's now, shouldn't be able to do anything, so it makes sense that he should get captured. Okay. But nonetheless, he is the first supernova, as far as we know, outside of Jewelry Bonnie in the pre-time skip, to get captured. Full-on captured, and his crew by a Yonko. Now let's look at Luffy. Let's see what he's doing at this time. Well, he's going to Whole Cake Island because one of his guys did get captured as well. And he does have trouble there with an Emperor's crew, as they should be. Yet, when we go into Whole Cake, we see him. He did, with help, defeat a Sweet Commander. And what we found out because of that, other supernova have come into Whole Cake Island, and many of them have failed to do anything, including Kid. The only one that did was Arouge. So outside of Luffy, what he does in that arc, we now have Arouge is sticking out from the crowd. We constantly are seeing this fluctuation of supernova that stand out. So it's like, it's not something that's just a clear-cut Law, Luffy, and Kid. Or what people are arguing, Kid and Luffy are, the main pillars of the supernova. They are the rivals, and that's it. No, we're seeing Arouge is a rival too. He's making headway for himself, and he even defeated a Sweet Commander. That's a big thing. But then on top of all that, he has a confrontation with a First Division commander who, mind you, should be leagues ahead of Doflamingo in power and skill, which I think is a fair argument. And you know what Luffy does? He excels tremendously. He literally develops Future Sight there and then. And he gets that. So it's really at this time that we're not only seeing, more of his Gear 4 abilities be improved or being critiqued, we're seeing he's developing more hockey skills. And you then have to ask yourselves, again, is it right to hate on Kid because he doesn't get screen time? Okay, that's maybe an argument, but Kid doesn't really have anything, as far as we know, that allows him to be parallel to now Luffy, who's getting this really major power-up. Post Whole Cake, Luffy's a different guy now. He is a much different guy than going into Whole Cake compared to the rest of the supernovas, where they're even going as far as saying he's a 5th Emperor of the Sea. Kid doesn't have that attraction. None of the other supernova have that. Whether he was a true Emperor of the Sea at that point, that's a whole other topic. The world is considering Luffy to be a pirate to really look out for because of what Big News Morgan's reported. It's even stated he was leading Beige and his supernova crew. Again, wrong information, But that's how the world is perceiving Luffy. With that being said, let's get into Wano. Wano Country is, I think, the nail in the coffin. And I remember going into it, like almost now 5 years ago, that a lot of us were saying, if Kid does not get a true moment to shine, that the debate of if he's on Luffy's level or even higher after this arc should end. I remember people were saying that because, again, we're seeing longer moments of Kid not having his moments because he's not on screen, yet Law is continuously being on screen. Luffy's continuing to improve. Even someone like Rouge has credit, and Kid doesn't. Now, he does gain some credit. Here again, he gains minor credit. Kaido says, when he beats Luffy in Act 1, that, oh, hey, you're a Conqueror's Haki user. Cool. That's like Kid. So, okay, we're confirming now something, anything for Kid that he has Haki. And it's in this arc that we get the SBSs and Vivre cards that do dive into more characters, including Kid, that have, supposed Haki. Okay, that's cool. But again, on screen, it doesn't really come about, especially in this arc. But okay, he's confirmed to have Conqueror's Haki. And he gets placed with Kid in the Udon Mine, Luffy. They have their training bout. Okay. And people are like, well, Luffy is using 2 hands to do all this physical labor while Kid's doing 1. Therefore, they use that as some weird leap off to say Kid has this entire time been stronger physically than Luffy until Katakuri. I don't know how we could make that argument at that time, but there was an argument. So that's, striking that Kid at this point, again, going back to the track record, yeah, he's notorious in the New World, sort of, but then once Luffy really hits in the New World, he hits the ground running by Dressrosa and Whole Cake Island. He gets a fleet. He has prominent places that are going to potentially be his territory. He's gaining massive notoriety. His bounty is increasing rapidly. His physical power is also growing. And, in this arc, we'll get to it, his crew is going to be crazy. Where the Hard Pirates and the Kid Pirates, they don't really show off anything noteworthy. Even like someone like Killer. Again, we'll get to that. They're nothing in comparison to like the Straw Hats. We find out Apu and Hawkins obviously did, surrender, or they were traitors the entire time. Fair enough. But we see again Luffy is continuously training, gaining way more Haki experience with Rio, and then inevitably he's going to get Conqueror's Coding. That's a huge stage for him to like bridge the gap with. So much so that when he shows Rio for the first time on the rooftop, Kid is speechless. He's like, oh, you can hurt Kaido with Haki? I didn't know that. What was Kid's plan? Oh, metal. Bunch of metal. But it's like, Luffy constantly is now standing out in power. And again, his notoriety at this point, like I said, going out of Whole Cake Island, and a little bit of Dressrosa is already ahead of Kid. So it's like, why are we still arguing Kid is like some like Vegeta parallel, or Yuno parallel, or Sasuke? I could list off so many like rivals and main characters. Why are we thinking that he is this way? It's the expectation that, come Wano, he's gonna show stuff. He's gonna live to his word that he's gonna take out Kaido, or do something to Kaido, or, he's gonna show off finally he's actually like a great Devil Fruit user. He has amazing Haki skills, but then it's like, he doesn't. Luffy, again, Haki, amazing, spectacular. But his awakening is next level crazy. It like sets him so far apart from the other two, Law and Kid. it's almost ridiculous to the point of arguing. Yeah, no, they're there, because they have awakening. I can't see it. Like, he genuinely does some outlandish things in his awakening compared to their two. But let's look at their awakening. Kid and Law, through some means or whatever, get an awakening, and they use it against Big Mom, which, by the way, Kid versus Kaido, not really. So that's interesting that what Oda did there. But anyway, Kid and Law now versus Big Mom. That's supposed to be their grand finale moment in this arc. And they are getting their ass beat. Which, fair. Like, Luffy's still getting his ass beat before his awakening, too. That's fine. They awaken their powers. And though, yeah, now they're starting to do real supplemental damage to Big Mom, when you really look at it, because I'm going to be that guy. I'm sorry. Kid's awakening, it's interesting. I think it definitely is an improvement upon his base ability, which is nice. I'm glad he's getting something. If it's not hockey, okay, it's a Delphi ability. But his new abilities, outside of like the railgun, which we'll see later on, it's like utility. Kid's new abilities are like mainly utility, and I don't know, it just feels like more of the same when it comes to his thing. So it's like, really, his awakening is cool that he's unlocked that as a fighter, but what he gets out of it isn't really that up to snuff compared to Law. Dude, in chapter, 1038 and 39, I'm gonna be that person. The bull, yes, I'm sure did something to Big Mom. But who does Big Mom outright say did the most to her in that 2-chapter moment? Between the Shock Willy and the bull? She says, and I quote, "Wow, those shock waves are really something. Trafalgar Law's techniques are quite tricky indeed." Like, and this is, again, with the scene with her arm broken, which, if you go back to chapter 1038, it's Law's technique that goes through that arm, not Kid's. You're now seeing the narrative actually push Kid below Law. Even though, like, what happens post Wano, which, again, that will be the wrap-up for this, conversation with that, you now are having Law be ahead of Kid. This kind of then pokes the hole in that whole narrative of Kid really should be neck and neck with Luffy. He hasn't been that way for a long time. Arguably since the start of Wano Country, he's not been that way. And then this ties back into what I said earlier about the whole trifecta of the Golden Age comparison, where people have the notion of Luffy's Roger, Law's Newgate, and then Kid is Shiki. Here's the problem with that. Number one, people want to use that to say, well, he's a real rival to Luffy. Okay, he's a rival, but he's not that guy because Shiki was not that guy to Roger. Because if you remember correctly, they said time and time again, the man closest to Roger was Whitebeard. And even, like, not Whitebeard, other pirates, like Rocks, if you go by Sengoku's words, was his greatest opponent, not Shiki. And then, like, if you really want to dive down the rabbit hole, it's like, okay, he has Marines that are rivals. He has Garp. So if we want to use that analogy for Luffy, it's like he has Kobe or Smoker in the future that could be rivals. So the term rivals that people are saying to really mean like, oh, Luffy's here, Kid's here, doesn't really work because Roger, with this Golden Age argument, had multiple rivals that were different comparably in strength. Like, him being like Shiki actually is a good analogy because Shiki, you can argue, was not stronger than Whitebeard. And now this whole thing about, like, Law being better than Kid now on Onigashima actually kind of works. So they're using this analogy to say, like, Kid is there with Luffy, when really this analogy actually is now being proven that, no, not only is he not there with Luffy, he may not even be there with Law. He's under Law. Like, he's like third place, Law second, and then Luffy's first. But this is all, again, in strength. Let's then look at the end of Wano for their reputations. I know people, again, misusing this idea of the bounties to say, well, he's actually on that level, yet again, trying to, like, cope that, oh, well, no, his reputation's, maybe still there with Luffy. Well, let's be real here. You know why they gave them 3 equal bounties. It is because Luffy is the Nika. It is not, oh, they all did equal share of taking out these emperors. So that bounty isn't really representing what actually happened. And then, unlike them having equal bounties, Luffy is considered an emperor. Not those two. Not Kid. So, again, I argue Wano is the nail in the coffin when it comes to those arguments. But again, that's just with a Kid and Luffy as captains being compared. What I mentioned earlier, let's talk about their crew. Kid's crew and Law's, they're nowhere near Zoro, Sanji. Now Jinbei, a warlord, has joined his crew. Kid doesn't have that. He's never had that. He's got Heat and Wire, Whoopee, and the rest of his crew, they're so nameless that in an SBS, I think it was like in volume 100, 101, in the recent ones, Oda's like, oh, here's his crew's whole name. Don't worry about remembering them. They're not worthy enough to be remembered, even by Oda's standards. So, his crew isn't even up to snuff. And again, Luffy, outside of his main crew, has a fleet. And now after Wano, he's also going to get another territory. So now we get to the wrap-up of all of this. The wrap-up is, Kid and Law are going to fight these emperors. Law, whether, or not he did good or not against Blackbeard is going to be irrelevant. Because at the end of the day, Kid was facing down Shanks, and he lost. He lost. And from the narration makes it sound like this might be the end of his crew. Again, this is not an argument if, like, Oda promised what he promised in an SBS. I couldn't find the SBS. It was in an SBS long ago that he said, I have plans for Kid. If this is the plans for Kid, we can argue if it was good or not, but if you think about it, this is what he set out to be. Kid is a stepping stone to push the story further and further for both Luffy and other, characters. Because now, like I said, Luffy's in a new pirate point in his life where he's not a rookie anymore. His true blue rivals for the One Piece now are the Emperors. He's a 4th Emperor of the Sea. That means his new, stage level isn't with the Supernovas. Is with the Emperors. And Kid's not an Emperor. Not trying to be, biased. But if you really look back at all, the signs, it's like, outside of coping, maybe, Kid never really was standing out in any particular instance to be that guy. At most, maybe you can argue, Shibundi Archipelago. But even then, it's like, you're really grasping at straws. So, again, his purpose overall in the story, at this point, it's a stepping stone. As sad as that might be for some people, he's a stepping stone, which I think he's still a good stepping stone because at the end of the day, it's not like he did nothing. He doesn't have no feats. He doesn't have any notoriety. No, he does have that. He, is one of the 12 supernovas. He was one of them. He was one of the main 3, you can argue, if you want to go by that aspect. He was one that had a right-hand man be a supernova. He was one of the first people to go into the New World. Okay. And he had, runnings with all, the Yonko. He lost to Kid. He lost to Shanks. He lost his arm 2 years ago. You know, he claims, you know, I went to Big Mom's territory not to get Big Mom, but to get in and get out with information. He damaged a Sweet Commander. He didn't defeat one. He damaged one. Okay. He lost to Kaido, and now he's lost to Shanks again. It's like, he has feats with his abilities now in Wano country, but his feats comparatively are nowhere near Luffy's. And again, his notoriety is not there either, so it's like, what are we really trying to say Kid is compared to Luffy? How on earth was he ever, if even now, supposed to be that guy? Now, maybe if he comes back, maybe, by some sheer luck, like I'm talking like leprechaun luck, unicorn, shoehorn luck, maybe he'll get a power-up. Maybe he'll make a new crew. Maybe he will be like Shiki and have a whole fleet. But at the end of the day, that will never make him Luffy. Never make him Luffy. If anything, if people want to say he's the Vegeta to Luffy's Goku, sure. He is the Vegeta in the Buu Saga to Goku that is Luffy. So go right ahead. Go right ahead. You can use that. But that will be the end of the video. Please do comment down below. What do you think? I know I'm going to get people heated with this video topic. Please leave a like on the video or a thumbs down, whatever you prefer. Comment, like I said, and subscribe. Hit the bell notification. And I'll see you next time for some maybe more controversial stuff. So stay tuned.